Two-Factor Authentication, Multi-Factor Authentication and Google Authenticator. These are all variations on a theme. They can significantly improve the security of your system with no additional cost. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use them to secure SSH login to a Linux computer, including a Raspberry Pi IoT device. I'm going to go over some of the reasons that it's such a good idea. Then I'll give a practical example using Google Authenticator, which I'm going to do on a Raspberry Pi, and briefly discuss some of the potential problems, such as how to get in if you don't have your phone, and a couple of alternatives. I've already explained some of these problems with usernames and passwords. Two of my earlier videos are shown here. See the description with links to these videos. So I'm not going to repeat those, but will say that multi-factor authentication is one of the best ways of adding security that adds to the standard username and password security. So what is multi-factor authentication? As its name suggests, the aim of multi-factor, or two-factor authentication if you prefer, is to add another step in the login process to make it more difficult for hackers to get in. There are some differences in that multi-factor authentication could add even more steps rather than just the two, but typically these refer to the same thing and can often be used interchangeably. Let's show some good and bad examples. So the first factor is typically still your username and password. In the past, then some systems may try and make it harder for attackers by adding an additional check. For example, your bank may have asked you for your place of birth or your mother's maiden name. This did add an extra level of security, but it's information that hackers could find out about potential victims, particularly if you've had your social network profiles public, so it's not particularly good. Instead, when we are talking about multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, it's usually about two different things. One is something you have, and the other is something you know. In the physical world, you can see a good example with chip and pin, as used on credit cards, or card and pin used in an ATM. The something you have is your card. This has information encoded in the stripe or the chip as the first factor. The thing you know is your PIN number. This means that even if somebody steals your card, they cannot use it in an ATM without also knowing the PIN number. In the virtual world, we can't rely on a card, which could be spoofed, but instead we can use something you know, which is the password, which is typically used in the single-stage authentication. The other thing almost everyone has is a mobile phone. There are various ways we can test if someone has a particular phone in their possession, which usually involves either an SMS or stroke text message, or, as I will demonstrate in this video, using a smartphone app. The reason that this is more secure is that whilst a password can be guessed, it would not be possible to do so for a one-time code from a mobile phone. On the other hand, we wouldn't want to use the phone alone, as then, if someone was able to steal that, they would be able to log in using that. So even if the phone is locked, in the case of text messages, they may be able to use the SIM card in another phone, for instance. So that way they can still receive one-time codes. So the password is still an important factor. The particular example I'm going to show here is for SSH logins to a Linux computer. The reason this is useful is that SSH provides a way to manage the system from anywhere. But doing so exposes the system to password guessers and dictionary attacks. Adding a second factor removes that exposure. What will happen is that when you try and log in and you use the normal username and password, assuming you are using that rather than key-based authentication, but I'm not going to go into that here. And if that is successful, then you also need to validate using Google Authenticator from your phone. So I'm going to show here how you can install multi-factor authentication, specifically Google Authenticator, onto a Linux computer. In this case I'm going to be using a Raspberry Pi, but it could be any Linux computer. The instructions will be specifically for Debian based systems such as the Raspberry Pi. This is going to secure SSH logins, so this means that you can have SSH open to an insecure network such as the internet, and anyone having to log in via that method would have the second stage authentication and need to be authenticated using Google Authenticator, normally through your mobile phone. This is a Linux computer that I'll be using to test the setup and to log in with. And this is the Raspberry Pi that I'll be configuring and logging into. I'm going to be doing this using the graphical screen, but you don't need to. There's maybe something you need to do a little bit different, which I'll explain later if you don't have a graphical screen, a monitor connected to your computer that you wanted to secure, the Raspberry Pi in my case. So I'm going to first show how you can SSH without this in place. So go to SSH to my Raspberry Pi here. I've used my own username, so username Stuart, and then the IP address. So this is a local IP address that this is currently running on. You'd use your whatever IP address has been allocated to your computer, or if it's connected to the internet, then your forward-facing internet address. And in this case, it's just the normal password. So that's how it's set up at the moment. I'm going to now change this so that it will add an additional stage when we log in. So you can do it through this, but I'm going to exit this. I'm going to switch back to the actual Raspberry Pi itself, and we're going to do the configuration on here. The first thing you probably want to do is actually not on the computer itself, but go to the appropriate store, Google Play Store or Apple Store, and download the Google Authenticator to your mobile phone, and then we'll come back to that later. On here, I'm going to start a terminal. I've got this quite large to make it easy to show the commands, but I will have to change the font size later. I'm going to do a quick update because I noticed that I've got some updates that are waiting, so I'm going to do an update and then an upgrade. And that's a useful thing to do before most installs. Whenever you wanted to install something new, make sure you're just up to the latest version. So now we've up to date, I'll install the package that we need, which is through sudo apt install libpam Google Authenticator. So PAM is the pluggable authentication modules, which is what's used by Linux for logon authentication. So it is also asking to install another package as well to do the encoding, but it doesn't take long to install that. So that's now installed. And now we can pair this with our phone. We can do this using, just type in Google Authenticator. Make sure you're logged in as the user that you're wanting to authenticate with here. You usually want time-based tokens, so yes to that. And now what it's provided is a QR code. So the problem is that it's using a text terminal to do this, but you're going to have to set the font really quite small. So mine's intentionally really big to make it easier for seeing on the video. I'm going to drop this down to about 6, I think is probably going to be. So as you can see, we've now got this QR code, and what you can do is go into Google Authenticator. If this is the first time that you've used Google Authenticator, then it will ask you to add a new one, or if not, then just hit the plus button, choose scan a QR code, and then if you scan that with your phone, it will connect. It will give it the name of your host name, and it will basically have added it to the authenticator. What you now need to do, in fact, what I'll now do is change the screen size so that we can see it better. Change that back to 22, as we don't need to see the barcode anymore. And it says enter the code from the app. So what you can do here is, just to test that it's paired properly, is click on reveal the PIN in the app and enter your code. Okay, so if you enter the code that it gives you, it just changed between entering that. So it'll create this. It gives you some emergency scratch codes. Now these are something that you could print off, say, and keep somewhere safe. It's important that if you do use these, you do need to keep them safe, because if not, then somebody can use those instead of the authenticator. But this is useful if you don't have your phone with you, or you've got a problem with that. And each of these can only ever be used once. So if you use one, then that'll just drop off the list, and you can regenerate more if you need them. Choose yes to update your Google Authenticator file. And there's a few questions it's going to ask now, and these are minor little things that can change the security level, but only in a small way. Compared to the fact that we're adding multi-factor authentication, these are quite small, and it's down to your personal preference and situation what you want to do here. I'm going to say that I'm going to allow multiple users, so that means you can log on twice at the same time. So I'm going to use no. Then this is possible time differences between, say, your phone and the system that you're running in. If you say yes, then it's going to allow a lot more codes than otherwise, but it's only a very small thing. And you can put rate limiting on to prevent people doing multiple login attempts. I think that's quite a useful thing if you haven't already got something on your system that restricts that. So we'll choose yes. And then that's it set up. Now I'll just show you the alternative if you are on a console and you're not able to shrink that QR code down for whatever reason so that you can use the QR code. So if we just go through the same process again, we've also got this secret key here. So if you click the plus on your Google Authenticator, enter a setup key, you can add your account name here. So you put in here a name that it relates to the name of your system, and then you put in this key. So obviously this is going to be take a little bit longer than just scanning the barcode, so just do that. If I enter that and then try that, and you'll see that works as well in exactly the same way. I'm not going to save this one because I'm going to use the one that I used with the barcode instead, so I'll just say no at this point. So now we've installed it, we've just created the authenticator, but now we need to choose what services that have to authenticate on this. And say on this one I'm just going to be using SSH, which is probably quite a useful one because it prevents people getting that console access and secures your system in that way. So we do that by updating the PAM, pluggable authentication modules, and we do that. So I'm just going to have to do this as sudo because we're doing this as root for all the systems. I'm using the Vi editor, but you can use whatever editor you prefer. And so it's in the PAM configuration file directory, and it's the SSHD file that we're going to edit. I'm going to just go straight to the bottom of this file, and then after this, so this is saying use the common password method, we're going to add auth required PAM _ Google _ Authenticator .so, which is the library file that it's used. I'm going to put null OK, but this option depends upon what you want to do. When you put null OK, what that means is that if you've set up Google Authenticator for that account, then you must use Google Authenticator. If you've got another account which has not been set up for Google Authenticator, then you will just have the single stage password authentication. So it depends on the security you want on your system. I'm going to put null OK and say I'm only using this one username anyway. But if you wanted to lock it down further, just remove that part. And then I'm just going to save that. And now also need to update SSH so that that's going to use that module as well. So this is the /etc/ssh/sshd config, the standard configuration file for SSH. And I'm going to search for challenge response. And we find this entry here, challenge response authentication no, and we just need to change that to yes. Save and quit, and now restart the SSHD daemon. And that's it. So that's now fully set up. So if I go onto my other computer, I'll just move that out the way, and we can try that SSH login again. So remember before it just used the password. I'm going to do the same. So it's asking for my password as it did before. But now it's looking for this verification code, and this is the second stage. So go to my phone, reveal the PIN, and then we'll just type that in, and then we're logged in. That's the setup complete. So it wasn't too laborious, but now that we've got it set up, literally it's a case of just having your phone with you, using your password, and then adding that code as well. So it's still quite easy to log on as long as you've got your phone with you. Remember, if you haven't got your phone with you, you've got those emergency codes, preferably you've locked those in a safe or something there so that those cannot be used by anybody else. There are some potential problems to using Google Authenticator. The main problem is if you forget, lose or break your phone. Unfortunately, that means you can't use it to authenticate. You may have a copy of the temporary codes that were generated, which could be used, although that then adds a potential way that a hacker could get in if they are able to steal those. If this happens, then you may need to get someone to log in and issue you with a temporary code, or you may need to physically log into the computer. Alternatively, you could use a service which gives you different alternatives, such as using SMS or phone call verification. So there are other alternatives. I'm just going to show one, which is Twilio Authy. This is a commercial service which you could use. It has different pricing structures, which does include a free option. There are several other alternative products though. And note that whilst I do use Google Authenticator myself, I've not used any of these other services, and I'm not sponsored by any of these, so it's just something you may want to look into. In summary, this has explained why multi-factor authentication is important, and shown how this can be implemented using Google Authenticator. I'd be interested in hearing if you've implemented Google Authenticator or any of the other two-factor authentication apps or services. Please drop a comment below to let me know. If you found this useful, please give the video a like so that others get to see the video. Please subscribe to see future videos. Thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you on a future video.